Several days after an out-of-state warrant was issued for a teacher by North Carolina authorities, she was arrested at a school near Miami. She's accused of inappropriate behavior with a student, allegedly writing love letters to a child. We're breaking down what we know about the allegations against her so far and getting insight from an attorney who specializes in child sex crime cases. This is Inside the Crime, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner. 26-year-old Jordan Kacie Hawk is headed to North Carolina from Florida after Miami-Dade County law enforcement picked her up on a fugitive warrant. We were able to get our hands on paperwork from the Florida courts that says fugitive is wanted in the country of U.S., state of North Carolina, county of Kannapolis PD, by reason of criminal warrant. The warrant, which was dated October 17th, accuses her of 4 felony counts of indecent liberties with a minor. The warrant didn't reveal whether the student was male or female, but school administrators in North Carolina, as well as an alleged family member of the victim, provided more information to local news outlets. We'll get to that in just a bit. We know Jordan Hawk was arrested on October 21st around 10 a.m. at her job at a public school called Miami Lakes K-8 Center. Miami Lakes is a small town northwest of Miami proper. Before her profile was removed from the school website, it previously stated that she taught social studies. The police department in Kannapolis, North Carolina released this statement. Jordan Hawk, 26 of Florida, has been arrested on 4 counts of taking indecent liberties with a minor. The incidents took place earlier this year when Ms. Hawk was teaching at a local school and involved a juvenile student. She was arrested by the Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office and is expected to be extradited to North Carolina and taken into custody by the Kannapolis Police Department. Kannapolis City Schools confirmed to WCNC in Charlotte that Jordan Hawk used to teach in their district. They also confirmed that the student is a former Kannapolis middle school student. According to district officials, Hawk has resigned from her teaching position in the spring of 2025 and hasn't been employed with them since. They noted that once they learned there were concerns about Hawk, they notified law enforcement and took it from there. We discovered that back in March, family members of the victim actually reached out to WCOC TV to report the allegations against Jordan. At the time when WSOC reached out to the district, Interim Superintendent Chip Buckwell said an investigation is underway and the outcome of the investigation will dictate the appropriate actions. But a North Carolina woman claiming to be the grandmother of the victim spoke with WSVN in Miami and provided a lot more details. She told the outlet, "I found 2 love letters. That's how it all started. And I told my daughter, I said, this is inappropriate for a teacher to be telling a child that they love him and not to tell the other students." She kept trying to reach out to him through Xbox, social media, basically started stalking him at that point. At the time, he was 12 years old. When parents of students at Miami Lakes K-8 Center learned about Hawk's arrest, they wanted to know how she managed to get a job with the district even in the first place. WSVN reports that Miami-Dade school officials say a background check was done for Hawk, but because the charges against her hadn't been filed at the time, there were no red flags. Once prosecutors in North Carolina determined that they could charge Hawk, they notified Florida police that she had a warrant out for her arrest. After she was picked up at her workplace, Hawk made an appearance at a South Florida bail hearing.
Charged as felony indecent liberties with a minor, 4 counts. There is no bond on the warrant. I need you to tell me if you want to waive extradition or contest extradition.
According to NBC Miami, Hawk did waive extradition, which means she's not fighting it and will be transferred to North Carolina within 30 days. WSOC TV reports that she had a hearing scheduled there in November. A spokesperson for Miami-Dade County Public Schools told Local 10 News in Florida that Hawk had been fired and is prohibited from future employment with the district. I'm joined by trial attorney Mike Reck, who has an extensive experience trying child abuse cases. Mike, thank you so much for joining me. Talk to me a little bit about the charge of indecent liberties with a minor. Is it just all-encompassing kind of child sex crime charge?
It really is. I'm not an expert in North Carolina law. I've tried these cases all across the country. I haven't had the pleasure of trying one in North Carolina yet, but I did take a look at that charge. And it's really one of the more broad-based statutes. Every state, every jurisdiction has a different version of it. And the indecent liberties is really a very broad charge that allows prosecutors and the police to go after anyone who has endeavored sexual improprieties with a child. Now, the only caveat there, the only nuance is that it only applies to children who are under the age of 16. And the alleged perpetrator has to be over the age of 16, and there needs to be a greater than 5-year gap in between the two. And so what prosecutors are looking to avoid there is what some people have referred to as a Romeo and Juliet situation where there's a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old. This is clearly aimed at an adult and a child. And here, if you have a child who's in middle school, I think I read some reports that the victim here was age 12, and an adult teacher, setting aside the power differential. That's squarely within the purpose of this criminal statute.
And how much more complicated is this investigation now that it's cross state / jurisdictional lines? Does that make it any more complicated? Is it kind of reaching into maybe that federal territory or no?
Not really. If the child is moved across state lines, then it triggers many federal implications, going all the way back historically to the Mann Act, and various laws to prevent child trafficking. Here, what at least it appears to me is the child was a student in North Carolina. The teacher was also a teacher in North Carolina. The alleged abuse happened there. And then what I think is really noteworthy is the perpetrator, after the assaults, left the jurisdiction and then was able to get, it looks like, a new job working with children in another state. So that's an issue that is incredibly important for public safety and child safety. But the prosecution of the alleged assaults in North Carolina, it turns completely on North Carolina law. And the only complicating factor is that the perpetrator is physically in Florida. So she has to be extradited, either voluntarily or against her will, back to the home jurisdiction.
And do you think because she was apprehended / arrested in Florida that she kind of maybe had a tip that this might have been coming, that she might have known that these charges might be charged against her in North Carolina, and that's why she went off to Florida? Do you think that's at all a possibility?
Well, I think certainly it appears that she's present in Florida with a new job because she knew something was happening back in North Carolina. I wouldn't, it's really hard to tell what's going on in an alleged perpetrator's mind when the noose and law enforcement is closing in. I suppose one would think that if you knew that law enforcement was after you, you wouldn't be at your job where they could apprehend you. So my intuition is she probably did not know it was happening on that day because she was present. But, that's not a question I can answer.
Right, of course. And then, Law&Crime, we have requested the arrest documents from North Carolina authorities, but haven't received them just yet. So the specific allegations against Jordan Hawk and things like the affidavit or the warrants are still kind of a little bit of a mystery. But based on other investigations that you've observed in cases that you've been a part of, how do you think we got here to where we are right now? How do you think this whole entire case came to light?
Well, what I think is happening is that it's 2025 right now, and we're living in a new age of child protection and a new age of awareness of grooming, awareness of the effects of this type of childhood trauma. And while the documents are still sealed, there are media reports that indicated that a family member of this child brought this information to the school. And potentially to the media, and law enforcement got involved. So I think that that's a very positive statement about where we are as a society, that immediately when an adult becomes aware of this, the information is conveyed to authorities. And I'm not sure that always happened in years past. So that's something that encourages me tremendously. I'm very distraught and concerned about how this individual essentially, it looks like, fled one jurisdiction, was able to get a new job in another. But I do commend the family and the local authorities.
And it's interesting, too, that you mentioned that specific part, because I know the school district over in Florida had said that because the charges hadn't been filed in North Carolina yet, it didn't pop up when they were doing a background check on her. But that kind of also brings about an important, I think, issue there, where it's like there's this possibility that investigation could be going on in different states, all of that sort happening. But then you go and do the background check and then nothing pops up. Do you see kind of a little bit of a problem there that could possibly happen in other states and other cases that could be a problem in the future, I should say?
Absolutely. And this is a problem that is historical. It's a problem that's present day, and it's a problem that projects into the future. Um, I and my office have handled numerous cases where a perpetrator is found out for whatever reason, through whatever mechanism, and then he or she is allowed to leave and then begins anew in a new jurisdiction at a new school or a new child serving organization with continued access to kids. And so what that highlights, at least for me as an advocate, is really two things. One, there is a time lag in what these databases and what the government action can do. It's not instantaneous. It appears that this was reported earlier this year, but it takes law enforcement some time to do their job, to file charges, to make sure it sticks, to do the arrest, and then for that information to get conveyed to the various regulatory agencies for each state, teacher credentialing boards, things like that. And in the meantime, time has passed and kids could be in jeopardy. So one, there is that time lag, and we want to do everything we can to squeeze that at a governmental level, at a regulatory level. But the other question that comes up, at least in my mind, is when Ms. Hawks arrived in Florida to obtain her new job, what did that school in Florida do other than looking at these databases, which are great, but as we know, they're not all encompassing, and there is a time lag. As a lawyer who represents survivors of childhood sexual assault, my first question would be to the principal of the new school: did you pick up the phone? Did you make a phone call and physically talk to the principal of the old school? And I don't know what the answer to that is, but that's certainly something that could have and should have happened.
And it also makes me think that this might not have been a one-time incident with one specific student. Does any part of you think that maybe there are more student victims out there?
So having worked on childhood sex crimes for more than 2 decades, I think that one thing that we are very secure in is it's usually not just one. Someone doesn't wake up one day and act out in a sexual manner with a child. That's just not how, human psychology seems to work. So I would be very concerned that there are potentially other children that either this happened to or that were being groomed. And if someone were to ask me, I think just as important is the accountability for what happened to this child, right? We have to have, the alleged perpetrator brought to accountability. We have to have this exact child treated, therapy, support, everything that we know can and should happen for a victim of a child trauma that will make that child's life better going forward. But we can't forget that generally perpetrators don't act out only one time. And so the question is, what outreach has been done at the school in North Carolina, and what outreach has been done at the school in Miami?
Yeah, and I agree. And, I want to also go back to a point you had also mentioned earlier, just about we're in the year of 2025. And to me, that means that there's a lot of digital evidence in a way that's pretty much out there. I remember when I was researching for this story, just about how the victim's family member was saying that she was allegedly reaching out through Xbox and messages and all of that sort, where we have this plethora of social media apps. We have all these ways of staying connected, whether it be through gaming messages or through social media apps, all of that. But in terms of when in terms of when a lawyer like yourself were to get the evidence and go through all of that, is it pretty, in terms of just how strong it is for the case, if you were going to be prosecuting this type of case, how important is that digital evidence going to be in kind of proving that this is what happened and connecting those dots, especially when you have things like metadata that can work in your favor, talking about timestamps and all of that?
So all of that information is critical if it exists. The days of, at least my childhood, when people said stranger danger, and the thought was there was an unmarked panel van that was nabbing children off the street. That's not how it works most of the time. most of the time, child sexual assaults are perpetrated by someone close to the child, someone in a position of power. And that person gets access to the child because they're trusted, because they're within that circle. And so, one would expect that the school Ms. Hawks worked at put in place basic standards of care. And those standards of care should be things like no one-on-one contact, no communication outside of official channels. I know it's 2025 and we have school email.
Right.
My kids have school email. There is no circumstance under which I think it would meet the standard of care for a teacher to be messaging through an Xbox to a child.
Yeah.
So that the methodology of communication in and of itself, to me, raises a red flag. So any of that information that's available would be tremendously helpful to the prosecutors, not just for proving that it happened, but for proving the intent on behalf of the alleged perpetrator.
And I'm sure those alleged love letters that were written by Jordan too might also come in handy too. And we've seen these types of cases here at Law&Crime a lot, and very much a lot. So in your experience, do you see suspects for the most part usually taking plea deals in cases like this? I feel like from what we've seen, we haven't necessarily seen these former teachers go to trial. Instead, they do plea deals in order to avoid just everything kind of being exposed in a trial. But do you see that happening in this case? I know we're kind of still in the early stages right now.
I think it depends on what that compilation of evidence truly looks like. And certainly an alleged perpetrator who's facing lots of corroboratory evidence, emails, textbook messages, love letters, in addition to the statement of the survivor, that's daunting. And the reality is that there are heavy criminal penalties for these cases. And so if there is a way for that alleged perpetrator to work out some kind of a plea deal where they avoid extensive jail time, then we do see that as a pretty common occurrence. The other issue that comes into play here is whether registration as a sex offender is included in the criminal aspect of that. That usually comes into play in their plea deals as well. So I think the reality is that right now we don't know how that's going to unfold because we don't have access to what the prosecutors and what law enforcement is seeing.
And say, I know with what we know now, which is pretty limited, do you see jail time possibly in our future?
Without knowing more about the evidence, I wouldn't want to speculate. What I can say is the statute that they charged Ms. Hawks under is a felony and carries with it significant time in custody.
Well, we'll see how that continues to play out. Mike Reck, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insight into this case. I really appreciate it today.
Thank you for having me.
Officials also confirmed they're cooperating with North Carolina law enforcement in the investigation. That does it for this episode. Be sure to check out more episodes on the Law&Crime YouTube channel. I'm Elizabeth Millner, and this has been Inside the Crime.